Hey friends, welcome to the Kidsmen Collective podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Ralston, and today's episode is called From Volunteer to Leader: Why the Words You Use Matter. We're going to talk about this idea of reframing the term volunteer and challenging you as Kidsmen leaders to call your volunteers what they really are: leaders. Because what we call people actually shapes how they see themselves. So, to jump into this, I want to ask you a quick question. Do your volunteers know that they are leaders? That's a great question. I think you should take some time, reflect on that, pray on that, ask God, like, am I creating a culture and a space that these volunteers do know that they are leaders? So we're going to focus on how do we change our language from volunteer to leader in order to elevate ownership. Ultimately, that's what we want, right? We want these volunteers who are leaders to be able to own their role in the ministry. So, if we're transitioning from this idea of volunteer to a leader, we need to give ourselves kind of a baseline framework for what these two words communicate. So, when you say the word volunteer, this often communicates that they are filling a spot or a slot on the schedule. They're there to help when it's convenient. Volunteer spaces are often things people are like, I don't want to do that, or yep, I do want to do that. And they say yes when it works for them. And it implies that it is simply to meet a need. So we often recruit volunteers in general life stuff, right? Work with, the dog shelter, or, what does that look like? Volunteer your time, go to a food bank, volunteer there. And so when we frame it as volunteer, those are spots to be filled. If we look at this as a leader, what does the term leader communicate? That communicates that this individual or this person is taking ownership. They have to lead with intentionality. They have a role. They have a specific job to do in that leadership role. So you see the difference, right? That is not simply a space to be filled. Often we require or ask of people to step into leadership roles with a time commitment, right? Will you be the treasurer of this board for a year? And then the term is up, or you do 3 years as a term, right? And you volunteer for those roles. So you can be a leader and be a volunteer, meaning that they're not paid. But what we communicate and how we talk about that position or that role, that will directly impact how they do and how they lead in that ministry. Does that make sense? So let's just kind of walk through this a little bit, thinking just through what the impact of identity is going to be within this idea of reframing the ministry, what we're calling our ministry leaders, right? So when somebody is seeing themselves as a leader, they're going to show up differently. Just like I explained when you're talking about the context of the word volunteer versus the context of the word leader. So when you are asked to fill a role or step into a role, you know as a leadership position that you have certain things that are required of you. You know what you're getting yourself into. There are expectations for what that looks like. So when I was in kids ministry, I had, this is actually a pretty frequent thing that you can see, and you can implement this in your ministry specifically. So I saw somebody who we, as a collective leadership team, as the staff in kids ministry, saw as somebody who had leadership potential. She was a teacher in a classroom. I believe, if I remember correctly, she taught for me every other Sunday. So she wasn't teaching every week, which is okay, but she was teaching about every other Sunday. She was dedicated. She had been doing the role since before I started on staff, many, many years, and she was really good at it. And as I observed her in her role, I realized her ability to step into a different position that gave her more room to do what she did well. So I asked her to leave her teaching role in a classroom to be what I called a coordinator. So the coordinators were the people who knew what my job was. And essentially, if I wasn't there on a Sunday, a coordinator could run an entire service without me. They didn't need me to be there. They knew emergency procedures. They knew how to get a hold of teachers. They knew how to make sure, if a teacher was a no-show for some reason, how do we shuffle our classrooms so that we have enough leaders, volunteer leaders in each classroom? They knew how to handle those situations. And so I asked her to step up in her position to take that role on. And so, about the same time, I was also in the process of transitioning all of my language to be calling my teachers, my volunteers, my check in teams, my greeters, everybody to call them leaders. They were leaders with different roles, right? Just what I just said. She was a leader as a coordinator. There was a leader who was a teacher. There was a leader who was a check in person. There was a leader who oversaw snacks. Those are all leadership roles. They are different roles. They have different positions and different titles. They are not just filling a spot. And so that is how we transition how we communicate about leaders versus volunteers. So I worked really hard, not that it's all about how I've done all these things, but I worked really hard to create a culture where people knew that they were asked to step into a leadership role and they were to own that role. And by owning that role, they were serving a purpose in the ministry. So again, using kind of these roles that I've mentioned as examples, these leaders, it may seem small to have somebody who just greets parents and families at the front, and that might seem like a small ask or a small role. It's not. You know how this goes. As a Kidsman director, simultaneously, you are needed in 7 places at the same time, right? Always. A kid needs to go to the bathroom. A teacher has to step out of a classroom. You need to be there. We have somebody who's late who didn't show up. I just got a call out that somebody was sick and they can't show up today. A new family arrived in the lobby and I'm supposed to be walking them to their classroom and introducing them. The printer didn't work and the name tags aren't printing out. How do we fix that? Also, snacks, we ran out of snacks and we got to go find those in another building. That's 7 scenarios all at the same time. Somebody needs you. Everybody who has a leadership role, if they're simply greeting at the front door, if they're providing snacks or cleaning up snacks for your ministry, those are all key roles and important things that need to happen. And when you train and equip somebody to step into that leadership role and take ownership of that, that multiplies you. First of all, it allows you to be freed up to say, okay, I am confident that if we ran out of snacks in this building, somebody else that is taking ownership of the snack prep and making sure every classroom has snacks, they know where to go find a bag of cookies, right? You don't have to worry about that. They can go do it. They can come back. You're never even going to know the bags were missing. So that is key importance that they're owning that, right? So just like I asked this teacher to step out of her role, I taught her how to own the service, how to own making decisions about classrooms and teachers if that needed to happen, and allowed her to step into a higher capacity leadership role. So just like you would think about a board of directors, right? You're going to have often a secretary, you're going to have a treasurer, you're going to have a president, you're going to have a vice president. All of those people might be volunteers for your organization, but they are all leaders in that role. So think about it the same way. And obviously, kids ministry looks a little different, right? We don't have a president and a vice president and a treasurer. Like, that's not what the roles are. But how do you define exactly what each role is? And how do you communicate that those volunteer leaders are taking ownership of that role? So, a couple of kind of key things that you could do to help with that is starting by rewriting your language. So, anywhere that you have printed physical copies of things, you should be rewriting that language. When we are framing it from a print, a read, a listen to framework, and we're making sure that trainings, emails, social media platforms, anything that you are doing communicates leader rather than volunteer, you are going to set the tone and the foundation. So you don't have to make some big grand announcement that says, FYI, we're not calling you volunteers anymore. Now we're going to call you leaders. But just adjusting your language and how you set that up for your volunteer leaders to know that they are leaders. Start by putting it where it is written out and rewriting that language. The second thing that you're going to want to do, and you can do this over time, you can do this on an individual basis, just like I asked that leader specifically to leave her classroom role and step into a slightly different position, is to communicate the expectation. So don't try to soften it and make it sound like, oh, you're a teacher and I'm asking you to be a coordinator, but it's really not that hard. And like, tell them explicitly what they are expected to do. This is not because you want to be mean. Somebody recently told me that clarity is kindness, and that is true. Clarity is kindness. Be kind to your leader and say, I'm asking you to do something that looks different than being a teacher. There's a lot more responsibility. I'm asking you, I see in you this ability to be an amazing leader and that you can step into this. I think you're equipped to do this. And I think that you have the heart and the vision for doing this. But I am asking you to step into a higher leadership role. And this is what I'm expecting of you in that role. Take the time you need to pray about it, take the time to consider it, and come back to me. Or let's sit down and have a conversation. Or do you want to shadow and see what that looks like? Those are perfectly fine things to say, but make sure that you are being clear with what the expectation is. One of the things that I feel like was always a battle in kids ministry was, how do we recruit volunteers? That is always something we struggle with, right? For whatever reason, we seem to always need volunteer leaders to step up and serve in classrooms, or in any of those capacities. But I had a friend, as I was in kids ministry, she had a full-time job, her husband had a full-time job, and they took a position with a nonprofit organization that worked with children who were in the foster care system. And they had a very intense commitment. I mean, they had to go to like a whole day long training before they started. They had to be background checked. They had to make sure that they were able to go to multiple court hearings when they were assigned a case. They had to visit the home of these kids. And there was a lot of commitment. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of effort. They had to spend money to do things. There was just a lot to that, right? And so, but they said yes. And I remember wrestling with this idea of, they said yes because the expectation was set from the beginning. They knew what they were getting into. They knew exactly what was required of them. They knew when they were going to have to do things, by what due date they were required to have a background check, by the time they were, what due date were they required to do their training? Did they have to do training every year? They knew all of those things. Those were clearly communicated. The expectations were told up front. And that, because they knew all of those things, they said yes. So choosing to be clear about those expectations is a foundational part of how you ask leaders to step into different roles. So, casting that vision, rewriting your language, communicating the expectation, and then equipping leaders. So, how do you equip your team to actually do those roles? So, these are the places where it's going to help you if you're doing this in a rolling basis, right? Like maybe you have a volunteer that you're asking to step out of the classroom to be in a coordinator role, to be you. Take the time to work with that leader. Don't try to say, I'm switching all my positions all at the same time, and now I'm going to have these 5 teachers step out of classrooms and be in this position over here, and then I need to recruit 5 new. Like, it's okay. You don't have to do it all at once, but slowly and surely as you go, equip your team members to know how to lead in that role well. So, how does it look to be a leader in the kids ministry in this position specifically? It might be helpful for you on the front end to just write a little mini job description. If I were to have a coordinator, what would I want a coordinator, their role to look like? If I were to have a check-in team besides myself, what would that look like? What are the things I would want them to know how to do? Give them specific skill sets, like you are really gifted in technology. Could you run our soundboard in our large group worship room? Those are things that you can map out and say, these would be the things that would be very helpful. And you have that skill set. So equipping your team, teaching and training them how to do those things, there's some logistical things that are going to matter, right? Like one of the things that this leader did as part of the day, she was the last service of the day. So she would go to classrooms that weren't being used. And if she wasn't needed in a classroom and somebody wasn't asking her for something or didn't need something specific, she would clean up my classrooms. And that took training. I had to teach her where the stuff went, how we collected the buckets of curriculum, which classrooms I left curriculum in. Like there was some nuanced stuff to that, right? So equipping your leaders to know how to do those things. And then hold them accountable. Hey, we talked about this. This is how we have said that, you were stepping into this role. These were the expectations. We've done some training. It doesn't seem like you're doing this specific thing. Can we talk about it? Do you feel ill-equipped? Do you think that this position isn't a good fit? How can I walk alongside you to help you grow in this space? Those are all things you can ask there. So accountability and empowerment are going to go hand in hand. If you are holding your leaders accountable, you are going to empower them to be better leaders. So considering all of those things, figure out what your expectation is, how you communicate the expectation, how you're going to equip your team, how you're going to hold them accountable, and make sure you have space to do those things, right? And again, this all goes back to the key foundational part of our ministry is discipleship. We are called to be disciples. And so how do we walk alongside people in these spaces? So I tell you all of that, and I also want to give you a slight warning and disclaimer. This is not going to be easy. If you start asking things of your volunteer leaders and calling them to something higher, to be leaders, to step into roles, to own those things, you are probably going to lose volunteers. That's okay. I know it's hard. I know it's scary. I know there's a slight panic mode of, okay, but if I lose volunteers, what am I going to do? First of all, God will provide and God will equip you to do these things. But also remember that if you have people who are saying, I'm not going to step up into that calling, then maybe they aren't supposed to be in your children's ministry. And that's okay. Maybe this isn't a good fit. Maybe this isn't where God's calling them to be. Maybe they just don't have the heart and the vision for your ministry that you want somebody to have who has a leadership role, right? If you're wishy-washy about whether or not you care about animals, you're probably not going to be the president of the animal shelter. It's just not going to happen. But the people who are in those positions are people who care. They get the heart, they get the mission, they get the vision. And those are the people that you want in your children's ministry. One of the things that I constantly said over and over and over as a kidsman director and a special needs director was, please volunteer. I always need volunteers. I always need leaders to step into these roles. But also, I understand that maybe you are not a kids ministry, like kids aren't your thing, right? That's okay. Maybe like I had one guy who was like, I don't like to work with kids in a classroom. That's not where I feel called or equipped or anything. And I said, great. Do you want to be on the check-in team? Absolutely. He was fantastic. He never got flustered ever if the printer's jammed or the computer stopped working or we had to do a manual check-in process. He always figured it out, and that was the perfect role for him. So finding spaces that work for those leaders, because that's where they're called to be and that's where they're equipped to be, and asking people to step up into roles is going to be really good and healthy for your ministry, but also it's probably going to, for a lack of a better term, it's going to weed out the people who are not bought in, who don't love ministry and the kids ministry and see the heart and see the vision in the same way. And so it's okay when those people step away. These changes are good and ultimately will bring you to a healthier ministry overall. So my challenge for you this week is call someone a leader out loud. Maybe you pick the person who you see that is the teacher in the classroom that could step up and do another role. Call them a leader. Say, I see you. I see what you're doing. I know that what you're doing is serving the mission and the vision of this ministry. And you are serving a higher purpose than just being childcare, just showing up to teach a quick lesson or read a quick kids Bible story. Like, you are more than that, and you have stepped into your calling to fulfill this leadership role. So call them a leader, use the term out loud, talk with your team, whether that's your kidsman team of staff or your team, whether that's your team at church, leadership at church, and just brainstorm. What does this look like for us to have a culture where people see themselves as leaders rather than seeing themselves just as volunteers, filling a spot, filling a slot on the schedule, showing up when they feel like it, versus they have committed to investing in these kids and this ministry. So help your team redefine the way they see volunteer versus leader. And I encourage you to go out, keep doing what you're doing, pressing into where the Lord is leading in your ministry. And until next week, I hope you have a great week, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for joining me today on the Kidsman Collective podcast, where we're all about nurturing leaders and impacting generations. Before you go, I want to invite you to take the next step in growing your ministry with confidence. I've created a free Kidsman Leader Assessment designed just for leaders like you. It walks you through the 5 key areas: purpose, people, programming, physical space, and procedures, helping you celebrate what's going well and uncover where there's room to grow. Whether you're a brand new leader or you've been leading for years, this tool will give you a clear picture of where your ministry stands and where it could go with a little strategy and support. Head over to ozarkministryconsulting.com to get started. You'll find the assessment right on the homepage, quick, simple, and packed with insight. And if this episode encouraged you, share it with a fellow leader or leave a review. We're better when we grow together. Until next time, keep leading well, keep loving big, and remember, your ministry matters.